I'm Rick O'Shea, the literary curator of the UCD Festival, and I'd like to welcome you to this, the second virtual edition of UCD Festival at Home for 2021. The UCD Festival is unique and award-winning, one where the global UCD community of students, alumni, future students, and also the wider general public join us for free online events. For the second year, we're not on campus, but instead where you are, bringing you all of the inspiring, engaging, and informative activities of the regular festival here for our digital and worldwide festival audience to enjoy. I'm particularly thrilled to be highlighting the series of UCD Festival at Home conversations. There are over 20 chats and discussions taking place, and with nearly 100 free, virtual, and engaging events also running across the weekend, there's something for everyone in the family to enjoy. You can stay up to date on the full UCD Festival at Home program at ucd.ie/festival. And don't forget, you can join the conversation through the chat function on YouTube or on Twitter using the hashtag UCD Festival. Do get involved. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the event.
You're very welcome to this panel on Irish debuts. My name is Niamh Campbell. I'm the writer in residence at UCD this year. And for this panel, I'm going to interview John Patrick McHugh, Louise Nealon, and Louise Kennedy, all three of whom are launching their debut work either this week or in the coming weeks. And we're going to ask some very general questions about the experience of putting out a debut in 2021. And I'm hoping that the conversation will just flow a little bit between us. But I will kick off by introducing each of my guests one by one. So John Patrick McHugh was born in Galway. His fiction has appeared in The Stinging Fly, Granta, Winter Pages, and Tangerine, and he has studied creative writing at NUI Galway, the University of East Anglia, and UCD. Pure Gold, his debut collection of short stories, is out now with New Island. Louise Nealon studied English literature at Trinity College Dublin and then completed a master's in creative writing at Queen's University Belfast in 2016. She lives on her family farm in County Kildare, and her debut novel, Snowflake, is out this week with Manila. And finally, Louise Kennedy lives in Sligo. Her work has been shortlisted for the Sunday Times Audible Award and the An Post Irish Short Story of the Year, and she has written for The Guardian, Irish Times, BBC Radio 4 and RTE Radio 1. She has an MA and a PhD from Queen's University Belfast, where she also holds the inaugural Ciarán Carson Writing and the City Fellowship. Her debut collection, The End of the World is a Cul-de-sac, is out now with Bloomsbury. So thank you, all three of you, for beaming in from your various locations to talk to us today. I'm not sure how much press you've really done so far. It probably differs from writer to writer with regards to launching your first book. But the first question that I've sent my guests in advance to think about is about being a member of what might be a generation or a moment in Irish writing. So I'll ask that question now. So you're all publishing your debuts at a time when there is a perceived surge of sorts in Irish writing, or an efflorescence of Irish writing, more or less the last 10 years and especially the last 5. So my question to you as debutantes in 2021 is, do you feel a part of a national or an international conversation about ideas of Irishness, contemporary life, the anxiety of influence, the literary culture? And are you speaking to the Irish canon in any way? Or is this something that you have little to no interest in? So would anybody like to kick off with riffing off that question? We might have a chat about it.
John Patrick, you were introduced first.
Yeah. I'm here. Give me the ball. I wouldn't say I have no interest in the Irish canon or anything like that, but it was kind of an interesting question to read, because it's such a big idea that it's so hard to think about when you write fiction. You know, obviously, I'm so aware of my peers and contemporary writing. I'm like inspired by that, especially at the beginning when you kind of first start writing. But it's a very kind of difficult question and kind of tricky to almost think of yourself within that, you know, that canon, those great names, even names that I'm like friends with. It's hard for me to actually put my work beside them. I suppose, like, as an Irish writer, you're always aware you're an Irish writer, because it's like almost a market term, you know. It's like we do very well out of being Irish writers, so one can't be too sniffy. But it is an interesting one to consider for your own work. And when I read that question, I started to think about those stories, and I was like, oh, what new are they bringing to the table and stuff like that. And it's kind of hard for me because I'm naturally kind of going, it's probably nothing really. But I suppose the only thing new they're kind of bringing is maybe an expansion of what's kind of come before in the last 10 years, as you said. And you could probably almost pinpoint it to Kevin Barry's Atlantic City, which I feel for me was like a big change in Irish writing. Suddenly this door was open that was previously shut or felt shut. So when I think of like that, it's very tricky and hard to think about when you're writing that you are helping towards building this canon or this idea of this new Ireland, whatever. But obviously it is something that's there, because if you read any of the books in the last 5-10 years, there is like a new temperament, a new kind of attitude towards sex and women and masculinity is all being questioned anew. So it's a really hard one to put yourself in it, but it's a really interesting question to consider in theory.
I was quite struck in looking over your collection, John Patrick, that the sense of place, which is, in any Irish literature course that I would teach here or abroad, the first thing we talk about is the sense of place and the inescapable nature of living on a small island, was so pronounced in your collection because you've sort of opted to put it all in one kind of slight quasi-imaginary place, or the island. It's all contained within one place. And the fact that the short story is unusually popular in Ireland is always tends to strike people as quite important as well, or interesting. And when you say about Kevin Barry, I do agree. There's something about this intensity of landscape or maybe experience or claustrophobia in your work. In your story, the landscape is familiar, but also exquisitely vivid because it is this small zone where your attention is falling very sharply on everything. And is there something about the short story form perhaps that lets you deal with that intensity in stages? Or have you ever thought about writing a novel which would focus on a sort of nominal West of Ireland place to the same degree?
I'm having to start think about it now. But no, it's funny because I've always been drawn to the short story. I don't have a novel in a drawer, or I've never really thought about like a novel idea or anything like that. Everything I seem to want to express or I'm interested in can be contained within a short story. Obviously, my short stories are often quite long, so maybe I'm cheating the system a little bit. But yeah, it's funny you say that about place, because I do think it's like a short story, and Louise Kennedy's own stories are so strong in place and setting and stuff like that. And I do think maybe that's a real Irish, the quintessential Irish kind of vibe for a short story, is that sense of place and what it adds to character. And it's definitely something that, like McGahern was such an influence when I first started writing. And I don't know if it's clear if a reader reads my collection, but I can especially see it as a writer, like the way my sense of place gets lower and lower in my newer stories, and that I'm kind of almost done with them. That I've kind of like got that intensity of language in some stories. I don't think I'll ever be able to do that again. I don't think I'll be able to spend that much time describing a field. I just don't have that interest anymore. And it's kind of it's a really interesting idea, and it is something really strong in all Irish fiction. And like people like McGahern were such a huge influence on me. And like, the way he even just has like, the trees and stuff like that, and how they all play into his narratives was so like fascinating. But I suppose there you go. That's the idea of canon. I feel like that's done, and that's you kind of have to.
That's so cool about McGahern, because first of all, I can sort of resonate. That resonates with the idea that certain intense sense of place is nearly a compulsion that once satisfied, you are freed from to a degree. And I am a huge fan of McGahern as well. And I think that his writing combines sort of realism with capturing the sense that living in Ireland is sometimes kind of hallucinatory, because the landscape really does have that level of intensity a lot of the time, and particularly in childhood. And so that those sort of memories become, like, I got that impression from reading your stories as well. It's like particularly the ones where the people are young, where the characters are young people. And I think Colin Barrett is someone who I think has that sense as well of the ferocity of place has to be kind of acknowledged. But it's interesting to see that once you've deposited it, you feel a little bit more like you're moving away from it. And that's kind of intriguing. I'm going to move maybe to Louise Kennedy and ask you, do you have thoughts on, I suppose I'm saying Irish identity, the canon, what John Patrick has called the marketing idea, which we're all familiar with, and the moment that you are now publishing your first collection?
I suppose like John Patrick, from I started writing, I've been aware of, I read Danielle McLaughlin's stories a lot, maybe at the very start. I started in 2014. And then, Colin Barrett, Kevin Barry, people like that. As far as the canon, I'm sort of confused myself because this thing about my identity keeps coming up because I grew up in the north and I lived there. I was born in the north and I lived there until I was 12. And I mean, I suppose my approach to place is not, you mentioned about place, especially in childhood, but that's not the way it has worked for me because I'm writing I've written these stories out of the Northwest. And I've just lived here for about 20 years, and I've sort of had to learn it. And I think my approach to place has been, as a stranger or whatever. So yeah, as far as identity is concerned, I've been asked if I'm Irish, if I am Northern Irish with capital letters, which I'm not. I'm Irish, and if I have to be specific, I'm from the north of Ireland with a small n. So yeah, I don't. I mean, I suppose I wouldn't like to presume that I fit anywhere at all. I don't feel that I know what I'm doing sufficiently to try and place myself anywhere.
That's I suppose, yeah, it is more complicated for you, or I suppose if you're getting used to being asked that question because the North is being brought into it, maybe it's a bit, you don't want that to be a distraction from being read in the raw. Would that be correct?
I mean, I don't really mind, but I think it's just, I think especially because the North is so, I come from a place where everybody is obsessed with identity and it is a problem as well, but at the same time, I haven't lived in the North since the 70s. But yet, I'm writing a novel now that's set in the North in the 70s. And I can see that is kind of my place more than the Northwest is, even though I approach the Northwest in a really, in writing it, I probably approached it in a really kind of layered way or something, that I was looking at everything. Because I was kind of trying to teach myself about it. So I was looking at, history, mythology, archaeology. I was taking pictures of birds and flowers and things. And I've had to, learn it that way. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, just about I don't know, just the idea of being in some sort of a canon or in Irish writing. I don't know where I would fit there at all. But maybe it's just that, lots of people are, I'm also conscious that I'm like way older than all of you too. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's sort of funny as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping not to be too reductive when I talk about a generation, because it is, I suppose myself, I feel is more of like there's something a little bit different between people publishing in the last couple of years and what I would call the lesser sung Irish generation, ex-novelists and writers and short story writers from the 90s. There's some kind of a sort of sea change. They see more of an anxiety of influence in earlier writers in the 90s than there is now, whether they're kicking against it or they're using it. It's very present, whereas we seem to maybe benefit from some kind of weird wipe that happened around 2010, and it's starting anew. I'm kind of having a hard time articulating it, but I'll move to you, Louise Nealon, because I want to ask you about this as well. I was watching a talk recently in which Belinda McHugh talked about going to Trinity she was coming from Longford in the 1990s and talking about changing up the way she spoke. She said, in many different ways, the way I spoke to cope with this transition. And she's one of those Generation X writers who's got McGahern influence on the one hand and then writing into the millennium, and trying to capture this thing about university as a point of transition because university is free in Ireland in the 90s, which I think is quite significant. And you have essentially written a Trinity novel, for want of a better word, and your character is having this experience where she arrives up from Kildare and is continually losing her student card or losing her wallet and having this this anxiety break in travelling from the family farm up to the city and trying to negotiate. And you've spoken about Snowflake and the idea of someone who's naive or soft or a bit vulnerable coming to this competitive intellectual environment because of that open-ended relationship between school and college in Ireland. And there's a great line where you say, you don't have to be smart to get into Trinity, you just have to be stubborn, which I laughed at because it seemed to me like an updating or a revisiting of this theme. And it was curious to me that the character in Snowflake seems so bewildered as well, even now still. So I wondered if you might want to talk a little bit about that. How much does the breakdown between Kildare and Trinity in your book feed into the meaning that you're going for?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say on Belinda McHugh, I I really loved Solace and Tender, and read those novels and felt a connection with them. And it's difficult to think of yourself in terms of a place like I know John Patrick and Louise outside of these little boxes, and we meet up at events and just complain about how hard it is. And it reminds me of, I remember Maeve Binchy said once that don't ask for other writers for advice because they're your competition, and that's, I don't necessarily agree with her. One of the few things I don't agree with Maeve Binchy on. I don't see myself as part of a movement or a canon, but I do see myself as part of a community in terms you can't really forget the humanity of it. And if I am in danger of over intellectualizing things, and if I over intellectualize writing, I paralyze myself. I did my MA with Louise in Belfast, and I found it really tough to write that year because I felt like I was trying to think about what I should write about, instead of just sitting down and seeing what comes out on the page. So if you read, I'm a big reader, everyone here is, and I don't know, I just see other writers in terms, I don't see them myself as a writer reading other writers. I see myself as a reader. And that automatically feeds into your writing subconsciously. And with my character going to Trinity, or me going to Trinity, there's a lot of me in that character. Obviously she grew a mind of her own going through it. And it was a very weird transition from writing in the I voice, where I was very familiar with the kind of mindset that she was in, because that was the mindset that I was in. But then she started to do and think things that I wouldn't. And that's where I started to learn, that's where when I started to feel uncomfortable, or I was feeling my way in the dark and really fragile, like you say, that's where I felt like the novel kind of took off. Whereas when I felt like I identified with her, and that I was comfortable in writing it, I just found it all very boring. And it was the not knowing, the searching for an identity and searching for your voice in amongst the madness, that kind of, that's why the novel exists. And that's, I think, whatever every writer does.
Yeah, that's interesting way of looking at it. It's in that margin of fictionalization when you depart from your own experience and start adding imaginative wings onto it, I think it's a learning process that then it reflects back on yourself as a person and a writer. But that's just been my experience, because I would have a similar approach, but that's it's quite articulately put. I'm aware that all three of you have gone through the process in some level or in two levels of studying creative writing, or of applying yourself to creative writing through an academy. And I wondered, do you have any thoughts on how that impacted you? Now, Louise, you mentioned perhaps feeling a little bit paralysed about content when you were doing it. And in the short space of a master's, I suppose that's the time-sensitive nature could create stress. But can you see yourself changing as a writer through the process of studying, or what did it give you? And did you start working on this work? This is a question for all of you. When you were studying writing, any thoughts you might have on that would be interesting.
Yeah, I got loads out of the year in hindsight. Mostly it was from being in a room with other writers. I learned loads about how different people work, and just being in Belfast, not being in the classroom, but being in Belfast at readings and going to different events was really I wasn't writing at all. I think I wrote I think I wrote like I strained to get my dissertation in, and Louise had a great metaphor for what it's like trying to squeeze those words out. But I won't say it here. But I think opening yourself up to being a mad Egypt who goes into a course and says to the world, I want to do this in a semi-serious way is kind of like a bizarre thing to do, but it's accepted now because we're in this generation that education is important for people's kids, and my generation is infantilized, I think, and I think I got a lot of opportunity that my parents' generation wouldn't have got. My dad left school when he was 14, and my mum was a nurse, one of 11 kids, and I feel like I had an extended childhood that allowed me to bask in kind of an airy-fairy existence. So I feel very privileged. And so I feel like I owe it to like my previous generations of my family even to like articulate, especially the female line, to articulate some of the things that like they didn't get to think about, or they didn't have this space or time. So yeah, I just feel really lucky.
Oh, that's really well put and very interesting. Now, you will all be asked about the Irish writing generation thing, trust me. When I'm asked about it over the last year, my essential answer ended up boiling down to free education in the late 1990s, accelerating the degree to which people could access education. And I mean, like, as you say yourself, people whose parents may not have even finished school now being able to do graduate education. And saying this is a sort of a neutral, ambivalent, but very interesting change in society. And I wondered if the literacy, the levels of literacy involved in studying, it being so broad in Ireland now, mean that people feel fluent and confident with writing as a form of expression above all else. And that's partly why there has been so much writing. And that's perhaps why it's so important as well to Irish writers. And then there's this idea that in Ireland, writing is taken seriously, and this isn't necessarily the case in other countries. So it comes together to create this this sort of fluency with writing. And I agree with you. I think education is a really big part of it. And it's interesting to see it's not something that's necessarily the true across the world. It's not even true in Britain or America that you would have that level of education spreading that far into the population. And it's quite strange because up until recently that wasn't the case. So when I was choosing masters in 2009, the creative writing masters at Trinity had just started. It was only new. It wasn't the done thing yet, and I could choose. I could get a master's funded by the county council. It was either that one or Irish writing, and I took Irish writing because I felt I couldn't explain or justify doing creative writing for a year. I had to do something that looked like a job, I know. But now I look back and I think that's really funny because the creative writing ended up paying off more than the academic one. But that even that change of attitude has been kind of liberating, I suppose. But I wonder, Louise or John Patrick, do you have thoughts on the art of studying creative writing or the academic side of things and how it might have affected your writing?
I didn't expect to write. I didn't really have any ambition to write at all, and I ended up being brought to a writing group, or like kind of badgered into joining a writing group in 2014. But I think very quickly, I kind of felt like I don't know if I actually could have or should have been doing it all along, but I felt that I didn't want to do anything else. So then I went to Queen's with Louise the following year, and I suppose for me, I felt I had unfinished business with education because I had done a social science degree in UCD when I left school, and I think I did my finals before I turned 20. So I was a complete flake. I was a really poor student, and so I think for me, it was kind of, I think I was really happy to, to try and sort of redress some of that carry on from when I was a teenager. But also, I think I wanted some structure put on what on writing, I think I wanted. I just felt that I had not even wasted so much time, but it just had taken me so long to get started. I wanted feedback, I wanted deadlines, I wanted all of that, and then so I finished the MA in 2016, and then immediately started the PhD, and thinking, oh sure, the MA wasn't, it didn't kill me, but so this will be fine. But I did find that quite a different kettle of fish altogether, especially because there was a critical element as well, and I didn't have undergrad English, and I had been swearing in kitchens for nearly 30 years, and I just really lacked I lacked the vocabulary. I hadn't, my reading wasn't strong enough. So that was really, really hard. I had to work very hard at that. I don't know. But, it's sort of funny, the thing about education, I think as well, because, about free education or whatever. Like, I know that when I went to college in the 80s, my father and mother, I suppose, paid for that through the nose, sort of half starving when they were paying a lot of tax and stuff in the mid 80s. And then, when I went to UCD, and for the first year of the PhD, because we'd had a restaurant that collapsed, it was basically paid for by a grant, because we were skinting on the dole. So it wasn't that there was any sort of, I don't know, sort of. I don't know. I felt I was very lucky to be able to do it. That was available to people who were unemployed and stuff. So that was kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's a real celebration of this kind of attitude. I think that, I suppose, the democratization of education quickly has had a big impact on Ireland in a lot of different ways. And it impacted the way people responded to the crash as well. So looking optimistically at the future, I think this is only a good thing, because it sort of doesn't mean everybody has to go to college, but the fact that it's no longer the elite thing it used to be is
But then other things come into it as well. I guess there's that sort of cultural capital thing as well, where I'd been to university before. So for somebody to say to me, oh, do you know that you can go and do a master's? That was kind of within my frame of reference, even though I've been very removed from, kind of third level education for a long time. But I think there are, I wouldn't like to think either that, we should presume that everybody on the dole would be dying to go to university, because there are all kinds of reasons why people would find that horrifying and not want to do it, So, I guess there's that as well.
John Patrick, do you have any thoughts on this?
I suppose I do. It was funny because I didn't really, I did a creative writing degree in my BA, but it wasn't a creative, because I think they're all different now, where there's a lot more emphasis on creative writing. At the time, it was like a normal BA, arts, and you had to maybe two classes a week. Is that like 5 credits or whatever? I can't even remember, but it was like a small part of a week. But it's a normal art degree. And it's funny hearing like Louise saying that, like, after the MA, she kind of did the PhD, because it just felt like, oh sure, I might as well. Because I do think there is a thing, and it's great, I think, the MAs, because I do think they give opportunities for everyone. That there's a chance for you to be serious for your writing for a year, and that's amazing, to be surrounded by fellow writers and working hard, and like hearing people being excited by a book is like, it is like a revolutionary thing when you haven't been surrounded by that. But like I went to UEA on the back of that BA, because there was a year out where I just got to work with Mike McCormick while I worked in a hotel. And that was amazing. I was like a proper writer, and Mike McCormick was reading my stories, and the final story I gave him was the first story in the collection. So it was amazing. But I did have a feeling, I do think it's an academic and almost capitalistic kind of urge, that I thought, oh, well, now I have to do an MA, and now I have to do this, that it has to be. I do think there is maybe a little, because I don't like the idea that, oh, MA and now you can be a writer, because it's sometimes blocked off for people and stuff like that. So I do think there's an awkward question to be had there. And I do know a lot of writers who have done an MA and they've all worked hard and stuff like that. And I was lucky at UEA, I got a scholarship, so it made my life a bit easier. But it is kind of a difficult question to be asked now, of because they are out of the realms for a lot of people. Or they're for 20 years, it might be out of the realm. Say if someone has a young child, and then they can do it, and that 20 years is a big time. Because I Louise saying there, she feels like she maybe lost years writing. That kind of breaks my heart, because I can see her work now. I'm could have had more, stuff. And it's really kind of difficult and interesting question to think about when you think about like writing education and the, kind of almost the pressure to do it.
Yes, like the question of has professionalizing this therefore eroded away the art necessarily, or the idea that you don't need an MA to write. And I mean, of course not. I mean, I don't have an MA in writing, but it's, I suppose, the fine line between allowing people to take a year to write with guidance and structure and leaving that open to everybody, but not making it so that there is only one avenue into being a professional writer. So falling somewhere between these two things, maybe. Because I do agree that the way to become a better writer is reading. And that's, self-directed usually.
Yeah.
And another boon we have here is a library system. I'm just very on top of the whole nobody take for granted the vaguely socialist structures underpinning the system in this country, because if they're taken away, we might slide in some bad directions. I'm going to move now to the another question that I sent you all, which is kind of open-ended, and I was really hoping that you felt called to respond to it, because it's kind of close to my heart, even though it's an unusual question. So is there a message, an image, emotion, intention, a desire, or an otherwise occult impulse, which is to say something a little bit concealed, behind your work or an aspect of your work you hope will be received or are curious about now that you have a wide audience instead of a single editor or a small group of trusted readers? Which, put more shortly, is, if called to it, is there a way you would really like your book to be read? Is there a reader that you imagine? And is there something you want to put across? And does that relate in some way to what has compelled you to write the book that you've written?
This is another difficult question to think about.
Yeah.
I do think maybe it might be different for people who have novels, because, there is like a ginormous thought. Yeah. Whereas stories, we're kind of lucky in that if, this one does that one does that. But I was thinking about it. I suppose, like, I don't know. I find it very tough to kind of say that I want my stories or my book to be, I want that reaction, or I want someone to feel that after it, or to think that, or to agree with me in this, because I don't really ever think writing should be moral. I don't think there should be set ideas in fiction that that's what the right answer or that's the wrong answer, and I kind of like when I read a book, even if I maybe read it wrong, but I still have like an inspired feeling from it, I suppose like my ideal reader is someone maybe who laughs and cries. If you laugh at this book and you also maybe cry, well, then I'm going to be very happy. But obviously there's a few other like subtle political thoughts in there that I would love if someone finds, but I don't feel it's my job, or it should, I don't think I should worry about if they're not found, or if someone thinks something completely different, like, I do like have like characters named John in the collection, and they're not me, but if you think they're me, I'm not going to say no. You know what I mean? I like that idea of a book having that freedom. Every reader can just have whatever they say or whatever they think it should be.
Mm-hmm. In putting in
definitely.
characters with your name, is it sort of embracing the ambivalence of how someone might read it, or the potentially different? Is it mischievous, or do you just think it's a signifier for your every character?
Well, there's a lot of Johns in the world, but no, it is it's like playing with the form. I'm very interested in making a reader kind of make a decision, and I like, that's something that I'm kind of really interested in, making a reader not being given the answer. And I think in short stories, that's kind of goes hand in hand, and it's a bit different for novels, etc. But I love that idea of just like, having like a back and forth almost with a reader, that they can decide, is that John me, or is it just a John? You know what I mean? And that kind of blurring of the lines, it's just something really fun. I do think, that's something that I'm really interested in, which is probably why then I'm also not as interested or not as worried about maybe a major concern coming across.
Yes, that makes sense. It's to drop it and see where it bounces. Either of the Louises want to chime in?
Yeah, I definitely agree with John in that it's a collaborative process, like getting your reader to read your work. and they bring their own stuff with it. And there was a time, and I still would love to micromanage someone's reaction to the book and read over their shoulder and be like, that means that, and do you see how that links up there? Which I imagine would be very annoying. But I kind of have come to terms with the fact that people will come to it with their own stuff. I'm also aware that the book's been marketed as a novel that explores or is inspired by my own mental health issues, and I quite mixed feelings about that. Just because mental health is kind of like a buzzword these days in the media, and it's a massive responsibility to be like, I'm going to expose mental health issues, and I'm aware that I can't speak for everyone, but I would like I wrote the novel for my 18-year-old self because when I was 18 I would like to have read a novel that gave me hope, because I felt like there was no boundary between me and other people, and that was a really scary, overwhelming place to be, and I think that I had bad experiences of going to different therapists and mental health professionals, and therapy and psychiatry didn't really work for me. Now, it did work later on, but I feel like the tools that I was given were very limited, scientific, and I was given a lot of surveys. And that was very reductive. And the thing that helped me the most was reading and words. And I just, like, I wrote the book because even the words mental health, I have a problem with. And I feel like we need to find better words to describe, like, the mess that we all find ourselves in, you know. And that's what reading is. That's what literature is, like, you know.
Yeah, so no, I really agree with you. I don't like reduction of works to having some kind of corporate responsibility if they choose to follow a particular theme. It's like it's done away with nuance, and I think it's an unfortunate hang up from YA, which is spreading quite forcefully into literature, and maybe needs to be held in check a little bit, because I think art needs to be able to explore with as much ambivalence as possible and not fall into like a survey that, you know, this book is going to, give this book to your 18-year-old because it will, it's just that the complexity is so much richer, and that's where art steps in and does what a survey can't, perhaps.
Yeah,
so
the best thing about it, the most unexpected thing about it was my dad reading it, and my dad actually enjoying it. And I was like, Jesus, because my dad hasn't read a book, and last book he read was Sean Boylan's autobiography on holidays, and I was just so surprised that he read it and actually got it, so
that is lovely. My mum read mine start to finish, and she doesn't read books either. Then she called me and said, are the following things true? And listed them, and I said, no matter what she said, I said no. But I appreciate
there were so many names that I had to change, because I got all the names of the characters from the gravestone down the graveyard down the way, so they're all local names.
Piece of trivia. So
they're not in the book now, because my mom told me to take them all out.
Probably a good idea. So, Louise Kennedy, perhaps we'll finish up. Did you have any thoughts on this weird final open-ended question?
Yeah, because actually when I read it in the email, you said at the start, about people maybe having seen things in your novel that, that you didn't necessarily know were there, or do you know what I mean? That, when readers or I suppose or reviewers or whatever. So I guess I've been kind of surprised by the impression that people get that all the men, the male characters are all terrible. So even yesterday, I did a Zoom interview with someone yesterday who said, out of the 15 stories, only one of them is written from the point of view of a man. But it's not true. So 4 of them are actually written from the point of view of a male character. But I think that maybe there's something in the fact that there's always like a female character who's seen very closely through his gaze or something that maybe, made that swerve a little bit, or that impression kind of alter or something. And actually I think that some of the men are okay. And I don't, so I think I'm probably a bit concerned because I did try all the time to treat people, the characters with empathy, even if they're doing appalling things. So I'm kind of, I think I'm sort of surprised and a bit concerned that that people think that these are all just like abominable men, and that these women are all terribly put upon. Because I think, the women maybe don't have much agency, but I think that that also sometimes they kind of conspire in their own difficulties as well for various reasons. So I guess that's the thing that I found kind of strange. And I think I would like people to think that that they were handled sort of fairly, if nothing else, and without judgment. But who knows?
That's a brilliantly precise answer. I love that. And it is interesting that, I wonder, I am tempted to wonder if this is only a question women writers really get asked about the moral quality of the characters and how they behave. Or maybe I'm wrong in that, but it is an interesting question, that to handle something honestly or candidly and show characters in 360 means that you're basically accused of generating a load of villains to plague these women. Now, as if that question might have had that assumption lying behind it there, if they even misread the amount of men there are, it's maybe a vendetta.
Yeah, that's it. So I don't know. I'd say some of that is kind of surprising, but and I guess in a short story as well, that all you're really getting is a kind of glimpse at people on a particular day or a couple of days or something, So maybe a year ago they were doing something completely different, or maybe they'll be doing something completely different next week. But
but the short story is the interesting, sexy, weird bit, so it's going to look it's going to look bad. So that is it from our 2021 debut panel today. And I would like to thank UCD Festival for hosting us, Ricochet for inviting us all on to do this panel. And finally, I would like to thank my 3 guests, John Patrick McHugh, Louise Nealon, and Louise Kennedy. Goodbye, everyone.